Now, the last component, if you will, that is important to understand in terms of conditioning and behavior and operant conditioning for that matter, is something that we refer to as observational learning. Now, your book talks about it in terms of learning by observation, and the nature of the beast, if you will. While I wait for my letters to actually get formed here, is the idea of the observational learning that occurs. And the key component in understanding observational learning is really modeling. When you see somebody doing something, our first form of learning comes in the form of imitation. And the key person to associate with this, and we'll come back to it because it has a incredible power, is a researcher by the name of Albert Bandura, and his name is associated with observational learning. Whoops, I spelled his name wrong here, Bandura. And what you see down here is something that was referred to as the Bobo Doll experiments. And the Bobo Doll, basically, many of you would not have any familiarity with it, but when I was a kid, there was a doll that was weighted on the bottom. And that's what you see with this little boy down here, right here, is this Bobo Doll. And this bottom right down here was a weighted bottom, so that when it sat, if you hit it, it would just simply pop back up. And that was something that was referred to as a Bobo Doll. Well, what Bandura did in his experiment is he would have kids watch an adult volunteer. And the adult, you see examples of what the adult would portray, and that would be getting the Bobo Doll down and beat on it, throwing it, kicking it, which is in this frame. And essentially what he wanted to find out is how much of that behavior would they actually pick up on. And essentially when you look at the video, the kids mimicked what they saw, and what you see below, what they saw behaved. And the frames below of that show you exactly what happened. Ironically, the distinction between the genders, there was no distinction in terms of the violence with which they beat the snot out of this Bobo Doll. Little girls would pick up other things as weapons against it simply because they saw it. Now, what we began to find out in this experiment is that the nature of the model mattered. For example, the age of the model mattered, how old they were. If they were, in other words, were they a peer or an adult. It mattered how much exposure the child had to it. There was a number of other items that were dimensions that impacted this observational learning that we talk about here. The other aspect, which we'll talk about in a minute, is the idea of mirror neurons, in which we have within our neurology, particularly within the frontal lobes, areas that actually mirror what we see happening. And many scientists believe that this is the basis for observational learning, and that's kind of the key, if you will, to a lot of the things that happen within us when we're watching something that actually is going on in that. I can't underestimate or underemphasize for you the power of social learning and social context in learning. And like I said, our first attempt at learning anything is to imitate. And then beyond that, once we master the skill, then we begin to synthesize it into a skill set that becomes part of a bigger chain of behavior itself. But each of these are key in understanding the power of observation and the power of social learning and its context. Now we're going to look at this a little bit more closely in a minute when we start talking about it. Talking about the neurological basis for observational learning. All right, what you see pictured here is some of what is referred to as mirror neurons. And the example that's shown in fMRI scans, and in this case it's a PET scan, is that when one person is experiencing pain, the other person has a heightened sense of empathy that comes with it, which is the ability to see and experience the world from another person's point of view. What we have found is that we have brains that support empathy, even in these motor neurons. So as I see somebody experiencing something that is painful, I have neurons that fire in symphony with someone else. And we are essentially wired for imitation. And these motor neurons are good examples of that. And we can see brain activity associated with performing and observing actions, and we see a parallel between viewing an action and performing the action itself, between viewing and performing. And that's part of how we tend to learn. Like I said, one of the first things we do is imitate. And imitation is the beginning of a particular skill. So we can simulate another person's actions because we store it in a way that is very similar in these mirror neurons. And we see that same experience with the monkey that is operating a puzzle board, and another monkey is watching it, and the monkey that is watching it later on is able to do very similar things. One would suggest, and we talked about this earlier in the developmental section, is the whole idea of theory of mind. In other words, the ability to see the world through someone else's eyes, if you will. And that's all very much tied into developmental stages, in which we talked about during that part of the book. And what does it take to develop this part of the brain that has the mirror neurons that reflect what we see, and therefore are able to simulate the action within? And that would make a natural conclusion of how we express and experience empathy / sympathy for others. And part of it has this remarkable neurological basis, which is demonstrated in an fMRI like this.